The disguise. The diner was small and quiet, the kind of place you wouldn't expect to find anyone of note. A little hole in the wall tucked between a laundromat and a rundown convenience store, it was the type of spot where people came for comfort, food and anonymity, the kind of place you could lose yourself in if that's what you were hoping for. For him, it was perfect. He sat at the counter, nervously twisting a napkin between his fingers. His eyes scanned the small space, taking in the chipped tile floor, the faded booths, and the kitchen that smelled of grease and stale coffee. Nothing remarkable, nothing that screamed wealth or luxury, and that was exactly what he needed. His name was Andrew Montgomery, a name that, if you knew anything about the business world, would send a ripple of recognition through your body. A self-made millionaire, a mogul in the tech industry, and a man who had everything he could ever need. Or so it seemed. But right now, in this dingy diner, he was just another face in the crowd, and no one knew who he really was. Not here. Not. Yet the waitress approached him with a tired smile. Her name was Lily, a young woman in her early 20s, with dark hair tied into a messy bun, wearing an old, slightly faded apron that had seen better days. She was petite, her hands always busy either wiping down the counter or carrying plates of food to the other customers, a picture of efficiency. "Morning," she said, the kind of greeting that seemed automatic. "What can I get you?" Andrew smiled politely, his voice low but friendly. "I'll have the coffee, black, and maybe the scrambled eggs with some toast on the side." Lily nodded and scribbled it down on her notepad. "Got it. You need anything else, just let me know." Her voice was friendly, but there was an edge of exhaustion to it. It was the kind of exhaustion that spoke volumes without saying a word. She was working hard, her life clearly more than just a 9-to-5 grind. But Andrew wasn't here to judge her. He was here for one reason, and one reason only, to observe. As she turned to walk back to the kitchen, he watched her carefully, his eyes narrowing in concentration. She had no idea who he really was. To her, he was just another regular customer, a man with worn-out shoes, faded jeans, and a plain jacket. He had made sure of that. He donned this disguise for a reason. It wasn't just about fitting in, it was about seeing the world through different eyes. He couldn't trust his employees. Not anymore. In his world, the stakes were always high, and trust was something you couldn't afford to take for granted. That was why he had come up with this plan. To pose as a common man, to slip into the lives of his workers and see what they were really like when they thought no one important was watching. As the smell of sizzling bacon and eggs filled the air, Andrew's mind drifted back to the events that had brought him here. It had all started a few months ago when he'd noticed some inconsistencies in the reports. Numbers didn't add up. Things didn't seem quite right. Employees he'd trusted for years were acting strangely, avoiding him, dodging questions. And that's when the idea had come to him. Disguise himself, blend in, and gather the truth. What he had uncovered so far hadn't been pretty. The waitress was no different, at least he didn't think so. She was part of the puzzle, but he wasn't sure where she fit yet. He had been, watching her for a while, trying to see through the facade that everyone wore. The way she smiled when she served food, the way she interacted with the regulars, the way her eyes would momentarily wander to the clock as the hours stretched on. He noticed everything. But it wasn't just her demeanor that had caught his attention. No, it was something more. It was her presence. She was always in motion, her every action marked by the quiet, determined energy of someone who had been through more than she let on. When she returned with his coffee and eggs, she set the plate in front of him with a quiet grace, her movements smooth and practiced. "Here you go, anything else?" Andrew took a sip of his coffee, studying her face for a moment before responding. "No, I'm good. Thank you." She nodded and moved to the next customer, her eyes never staying on him for too long. And yet, Andrew could feel it, a quiet connection. It was something in the way she carried herself. something that made him want to know more. She had a story, and it was a story he was going to uncover, but for now, he had to be careful. The last thing he wanted was to blow his cover. As the morning wore on, the diner began to fill up with more customers, the clattering of plates and forks becoming a familiar background hum. Lily moved through the restaurant, efficiently taking orders and delivering food, her demeanor never changing. She was nothing special, and yet she intrigued him more than anyone he'd ever met. There was a vulnerability about her, something that she hid well, but it was there. He could see it in the way she held herself, the subtle way her shoulders slumped after a long shift. Andrew leaned back in his seat, staring at her from across the room. The time to investigate was now. But it wasn't just about the investigation anymore. Something was changing inside him, something he wasn't ready for. The door to the diner opened, and a gust of cold wind blew through, causing Lily to shiver. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, then hurried to the table at the front. For a moment, Andrew was lost in thought. The way she moved, the way she reacted to the world around her, struck a chord within him. But he couldn't let it distract him. Not yet. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it quickly, seeing a message from his assistant. "We need you back at the office. There's an urgent meeting with the board." Andrew hesitated. He'd been coming to the diner every day for a week, gathering information and watching Lily without her knowledge. The investigation was far from over, but his company needed him. With a sigh, he stood up and left a tip on the counter, standing up a little straighter as he adjusted his jacket. He walked toward the door, his mind racing with thoughts of Lily. The door opened, and he stepped out into the cold morning air, the wind biting at his face. He had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was for sure: he wasn't done with this diner, or with Lily, not by a long shot. Growing intrigue, Andrew's footsteps echoed down the quiet, empty street as he made his way back to the office. The cold air nipped at his skin, but he hardly noticed. His thoughts were consumed by the diner, by Lily. His investigation had started innocently enough, a simple test of his employees' loyalty. But now, with every passing day, it was turning into something far more complicated, something that involved not just his company, but a woman who had somehow caught his attention in ways he hadn't expected. The board meeting would have to wait. He needed to clear his head. He stopped outside a cafe, the warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, beckoning him in. He walked inside and ordered a coffee to go, his eyes scanning the room absent-mindedly. It wasn't just any cafe. This was a place where important deals were made, where the wealthy and powerful came to discuss their next moves. But for Andrew, it was just a temporary distraction, a way to kill time before he returned to the mess that had become his life. As he sipped his coffee, his mind kept drifting back to Lily, the way she moved through the diner with purpose, the way her eyes flickered nervously whenever she interacted with customers. But it wasn't just that. There was something else, something hidden in the way she avoided the regulars' gazes, something she was keeping locked away, perhaps even from herself. Andrew knew better than most people that when someone hid something, it wasn't because they wanted to. It was because they had to. He had seen it countless times in his line of work, people wearing masks, pretending to be something they weren't, all in an effort to shield themselves from a world they no longer trusted. But Lily wasn't like the others. At least, not entirely. He had noticed something in her eyes that made him believe she wasn't just hiding secrets, she was protecting them, and that made her all the more fascinating. The next morning, Andrew walked into the diner again. The familiar jingle of the doorbell signaling his arrival. His heart rate sped up, though he couldn't explain why. He didn't understand what was happening inside him. He had come to the diner as part of an investigation. Nothing more, nothing less. But each visit, Each conversation with Lily brought him closer to something far deeper than he had anticipated. Lily was there, of course. She was always there, working tirelessly, keeping the diner running smoothly, greeting every customer with a warmth that seemed almost out of place in this little rundown establishment. But as she walked over to his table, her face faltered for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted to the counter, then back to him. She was worried. That much was obvious. "Good morning," she said, a hint of hesitation in her voice. "What can I get you today?" Andrew studied her for a moment, wondering what was going through her mind. He wasn't the only one who felt the tension in the air. "I'll have the same," he replied. "The eggs and toast." Her pen hovered over her pad for a moment before she scribbled it down and moved toward the kitchen. Andrew leaned back in his seat, watching her retreating form, his mind running through the possibilities. He was beginning to suspect that his investigation had been a mistake, but it was too late to turn back now. As the minutes ticked by, the diner slowly began to fill up with the usual crowd. Regulars settled into their usual booths, and the low hum of conversation filled the air. But despite the outward normalcy, something was different today. Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't until Lily returned with his food that he realized what was happening. She placed the plate in front of him with the same quiet professionalism, but there was something else in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. She was nervous. "Is everything okay?" Andrew asked, his voice soft, almost like he was speaking to someone who was hiding something. It was a question he had asked many times in his life, but he hadn't expected to be asking it now. Lily's gaze flickered up to meet his, and for the briefest of moments their eyes locked. It was as if time had stopped, and in that frozen instant, something unspoken passed between them. She swallowed, her lips pressing together in a tight line before she answered. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said, her voice unconvincing. Andrew smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. If you need anything, just let me know." She nodded quickly and walked away, but Andrew could feel the tension in the air long after she had turned her back to him. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just with his investigation. It was with her. Lily was hiding something. But what? The next few days passed by in a blur. Andrew continued to visit the diner, slipping into his poor persona and watching Lily from afar. Each day he saw more cracks in her facade. She was good at pretending, good at keeping her emotions in check. But the more he watched, the more he saw through the cracks. There was a strange unease about her, something deep inside that made her seem fragile, almost as if she were waiting for something to happen, something to break. It wasn't just her eyes that gave her away. It was the way she held herself, the way her shoulders hunched ever so slightly, as if she were bracing for a storm. Andrew's curiosity deepened with each passing day. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about what lay beneath the surface. One afternoon, after a particularly busy lunch rush, Lily took a break and sat at the counter. Andrew watched her carefully, noticing how her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee. She wasn't one to show weakness, but in that moment, it was undeniable. Something was happening, something he wasn't privy to. As if on cue, the door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and he immediately made a beeline for the counter. Lily looked up, her face blanching at the sight of him. Andrew's gaze flicked between them, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere. The man spoke to Lily in low tones, his voice smooth and commanding. Lily's body stiffened, but she didn't argue. She nodded and led him to the back of the diner, her face tight with tension. Andrew's curiosity got the better of him. He stood up, quietly following them at a distance, careful not to attract attention. The door to the back room was slightly ajar, and he could just make out their voices. Lily. The man's voice was calm, but there was an underlying threat in it. You know what I want. Lily's voice trembled slightly. I told you I don't have it yet. You've had plenty of time, the man said, his tone turning colder. You'd better have it soon, or there will be consequences. Andrew's heart rate quickened. This wasn't just a casual conversation. It was something much darker. The man wasn't just a customer. He was a threat. Lily's voice was barely audible, but Andrew could make out the words. I'm doing everything I can. Just give me a little more time. The man's reply was cold, harsh. You're out of time, Lily. You've had your chance. And then, silence. Andrew stepped back, retreating into the shadows, his mind racing. What was going on? What kind of danger was Lily in as he made his way back to his seat, his hands clenched into fists? This wasn't just about his investigation anymore. This was something far bigger than that. Lily was in trouble, and Andrew was going to find out why. The truth unravels. The diner was quieter than usual that morning, the low hum of conversation replaced by the clinking of dishes and the soft shuffle of feet behind the counter. Andrew sat at his usual spot, watching the world unfold around him. He had been coming here every day for the past few weeks, pretending to be just another man in need of a hot meal, while secretly observing the people around him. But as time went on, it wasn't the employees or his investigation that consumed his thoughts. It was Lily, the waitress who had initially caught his attention because of her subtle grace and mystery, now held a far deeper intrigue. He had been so focused on the investigation, so intent on uncovering the truth about his employees, that he had failed to notice the web of secrets Lily was tangled in. And now he couldn't stop thinking about her fear, her struggle, the way she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her slender shoulders, yet never showed a crack in her armor. Andrew had always believed he could handle any situation. He had built his empire on calculated decisions and ruthless actions. But Lily was different. There was something about her that made him question everything he thought he knew about himself, about the world, about trust. The door to the diner opened with a soft jingle, and in walked the man from the day before, the one who had spoken to Lily in the back room. Andrew's body tensed as he watched the man scan the room, his gaze stopping when he saw Lily. Without hesitation, he strode to the counter, his eyes locking onto her with a look that sent an involuntary chill down Andrew's spine. Lily had been wiping down a table, but when she saw the man, her posture stiffened. Her movement slowed, and Andrew could see the faint tremor in her hands. She didn't acknowledge him immediately, but the tension was palpable. The man spoke first, his voice smooth and confident. Lily, I didn't expect to see you here. You should have called me last night. Lily didn't respond right away, and Andrew's mind raced. He could tell there was something more between them than just a simple customer-waitress interaction. There was fear, the kind of fear that came from being trapped, from knowing that no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't escape. I was busy, Lily muttered, her eyes avoiding his. I didn't have time. The man's gaze narrowed, and for a brief moment, Andrew felt as if he were watching a predator circle its prey. You always have time for me, Lily, he said, his tone dark and dangerous. Lily flinched, but she quickly recovered, giving him a tight smile. I'm working right now. Can I get you something? The man seemed to consider her words for a moment, his eyes scanning her face, reading the subtle cues that betrayed her discomfort. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible smile, he nodded. Fine, I'll have a coffee black. Lily moved toward the coffee pot, her hands shaking slightly as she poured the drink. Andrew watched her closely, trying to read her expression. She was hiding something, that much was clear. But what was it? What was this man threatening her with? And why was she so willing to obey him? Lily returned with the coffee, But instead of leaving, she lingered, standing just out of reach. The man didn't seem to mind, though. He took the cup from her, his fingers brushing hers as he did. It was an innocent enough gesture, but Andrew could see the unease that flashed across Lily's face. The way her eyes flickered to the door, then to the floor. Andrew couldn't stand it any longer. He had to know what was going on. He had to know what had brought this man into Lily's life. But how? He couldn't risk blowing his cover, not yet. He took a deep breath and stood up, walking toward the back of the diner, pretending to be just another customer. He slipped through the kitchen door, careful not to make a sound. From there, he could see the back hallway that led to the restrooms, and just beyond that, the door to the storage room. He had seen Lily slip in and out of that room before, always, with a sense of urgency, as if she were hiding something. He waited for a moment, watching the man at the counter and hoping he wouldn't follow. Then, when the moment felt right, he moved quietly toward the storage room door. He pushed it open just a crack, enough to see into the dimly lit room. Lily was standing near the back, her shoulders tense, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The man was speaking to her in low tones, but Andrew couldn't hear what they were saying. What he could see, though, was enough. The man stepped closer to Lily, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. She flinched but didn't pull away. And then Andrew saw it, the fear, the way Lily's face twisted in a mixture of dread and resignation. "You have to do it, Lily," the man said, his voice low and commanding. "Or things are going to get much worse for you. You know what I mean." Lily looked down, her lips pressed together tightly, as if holding back tears. "I can't," she whispered. "I've already told you I can't." Andrew's heart raced. He had to know what this was about. What was she hiding? What did this man want from her? Before he could act, the man turned and walked out of the room, leaving Lily standing alone in the silence. Andrew quickly stepped back, retreating to the kitchen just as the man exited the diner. His mind was spinning, his thoughts a blur of questions and fear. What was Lily involved in? Who was this man? And why was she so terrified of him? As the door to the diner closed behind the man, Andrew's pulse quickened. He had to confront her. He had to find out the truth. But when he turned to approach her, Lily was already gone. She had slipped into the back, out of sight. Andrew felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was no longer just an investigation. It was personal. The woman he had been observing was in danger, and he had to protect her. He didn't know why, but something inside him had shifted. It was no longer about the investigation. It was about her. The next day, Andrew didn't visit the diner. He couldn't. His mind was too consumed with the image of Lily standing alone in that room, her face filled with terror. He spent hours going through his files, trying to distract himself, but the thoughts wouldn't leave him. He knew he had to do something, but what? He didn't know what Lily's secret was, but he knew it was something that could destroy her if she wasn't. Careful. That afternoon, he called his assistant, Rebecca. "I need everything you can find on Lily Green," he said, his voice tense. "Every scrap of information, background, connections, anything." Rebecca was quick to respond. "Of course, Mr. Montgomery. I'll have it to you by tomorrow morning." Andrew sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had to know the truth. He had to know everything about Lily before it was too late. The night passed in a haze of sleeplessness. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out for her. Something was coming, and he had to be ready. Secrets revealed the following. Morning. Andrew felt the weight of the night's events heavy on his shoulders. He had spent the hours after his call to Rebecca pacing the halls of his sleek modern apartment, unable to find any relief from the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. His connection to Lily, though still shrouded in mystery, had crossed an invisible line. It wasn't just about the investigation anymore. Somewhere between the casual observations and the slow unraveling of her secrets, Andrew had found himself emotionally entangled. It wasn't something he had expected. It wasn't something he had prepared for. The next morning, as the city bustled outside his penthouse windows, Andrew sat at his desk, staring at the screen before him. He had a wealth of information at his disposal: his company, his investments, his empire. Yet for the first time in a long while, it all felt empty. The phone on his desk buzzed. It was Rebecca. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice professional but with an edge of uncertainty. "I've gathered everything on Lily Green that I could find. It's complicated." Andrew leaned forward. "What do you mean by complicated? She's not who she seems. There's more to her background than you're aware of." Andrew's heart skipped a beat. He'd been expecting this, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. "What do you mean? Tell me everything." Rebecca paused, then spoke in a low, almost hesitant tone. "Lily Green, she's not just a waitress. She's tied to something much darker. Her family has a history with the criminal underworld. Her father was involved in shady dealings, and her mother, well, she disappeared a few years ago under mysterious circumstances." Andrew's mind raced. This wasn't the woman he had imagined her to be. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form, but they didn't make sense. "What about her?" he asked, his voice strained. "What's her involvement in all of this?" Rebecca hesitated, but then she continued. "It seems like Lily is being blackmailed. Her father's debts were substantial. It's possible she's being forced to do things for the people who hold the strings." Andrew sat back in his chair, stunned. His thoughts drifted to the man he had seen the day before, the man who had cornered Lily in the back of the diner. The coldness in his demeanor, the way he had demanded Lily's compliance, all made sense now. She was a pawn in a dangerous game, and Andrew had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. "I need to see her," Andrew said, his voice quiet but filled with determination. "Now." Lily was just finishing her shift when Andrew entered the diner that afternoon. His presence felt different this time. It wasn't the casual air he had worn before. This was no longer just about him blending in. This was about getting to the truth, getting to her. As usual, Lily didn't notice him immediately. She was too busy with the orders piling up, her hands moving in a rhythm she had perfected after months, no, years, of working at the diner. But as he approached the counter, their eyes met, and something shifted between them. Lily's expression faltered just for a moment, but Andrew saw it. She knew. She knew he had uncovered something. "Good afternoon, Lily," Andrew said, his tone deliberately casual. He wanted to keep this as nonchalant as possible, but inside his heart was racing. Lily glanced at him, her lips pressing into a tight smile. "Good afternoon. What can I get you today?" Her voice was polite, but there was an underlying tremor in her words. Andrew didn't waste time. "I need to talk to you, Lily. Alone." Lily froze for a split second, and in that moment, Andrew could see the vulnerability in her eyes. She nodded slowly, then turned to the other customers, asking them if they needed anything else. She was professional, as always, but there was a shadow of fear that lingered over her. "Follow me," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. They moved to the back of the diner, past the kitchen, and into a small storage room. The door shut behind them, and for the first time they were alone. "Lily," Andrew began, his voice low but filled with intensity. "I know what's going on. I know about your father. And I know you're being blackmailed." She took a step back, her face paling. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, her words rushed. "You don't know anything. You're just—" "I do know," Andrew interrupted. His eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in his voice. "I don't know everything, but I know enough. I know you're in danger." Lily's breathing quickened, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse under the weight of everything she had been hiding. Her arms were folded tightly, Across her chest, her face strained. "Who did this to you, Lily?" Andrew asked, his voice pleading now. "You don't have to do this alone. You can trust me." She shook her head, tears threatening to spill over. "I can't," she whispered. "You don't understand. I don't have a choice." Andrew stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Yes, you do. You always have a choice. But you have to trust someone. Please, let me help." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she looked down, her body trembling. "I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to be involved in all of this. But after my father, after he died, they came for me. I didn't have a choice. I had to do what they said." Andrew's heart sank as he watched her fall apart. She had been carrying this burden all alone, afraid to trust anyone, afraid to ask for help. And here she was, finally breaking down in front of him. "They've been forcing me to work for them," she continued, her voice cracking. "They want me to deliver information, to spy on people. But I can't. I can't do it anymore. I don't know what they'll do if I don't comply." Andrew took a step forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone anymore. You're not alone. I'm here for you." For a long moment they stood there, in silence. The weight of her words hung between them, filling the small room with a palpable sense of despair. But in that moment, something else shifted. There was a glimmer of hope in Lily's eyes, a quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, there was someone who cared. "I don't know how to get out of this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to make it stop." "We'll figure it out together," Andrew said, his voice firm. "I promise you we will." Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "But what if they come after you too? What if they hurt you?" Andrew smiled gently. "If they try, they'll have to deal with me." For the first time since they had met, Lily seemed to let go of the fear that had gripped her for so long. She nodded slowly, though uncertainty still clouded her expression. But there was something in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. Trust, and that was all Andrew needed. Later that evening, as Andrew walked out of the diner, he couldn't shake the image of Lily's tear-streaked face. The truth was out now, but this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to uncover, still so many dangers lurking in the shadows, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just a passive observer. He was part of her story now, and he would do whatever it took to protect her, the ultimate decision. The next few days passed in a blur. Andrew couldn't focus on anything else. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Lily, her confession, the secrets she had revealed, and the dangerous web she was caught in. He had promised her that he would help, but as the days dragged on, he found himself more uncertain of how to proceed. There was no easy way out for either of them. Every step forward seemed to come with a new risk. Andrew had always been a man who thrived on control, on calculated risks and rational decisions. But with Lily, nothing seemed certain. Everything was messy. The stakes were higher than they had ever been before, and the deeper he delved into her world, the more dangerous it became. It had only been a few days since their conversation in the back of the diner, but already the shadows that loomed over Lily's life had begun to grow darker. The man who had been blackmailing her, who had been controlling her every move, had been silent for the time being, but Andrew knew it wouldn't last. The storm was coming. It was only a matter of time. He couldn't protect her forever, or could he? Lily was sitting at the counter when Andrew entered the diner the next day. She didn't look up immediately, her hands busy with the daily routine of wiping down the counters. She'd been trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, but it was obvious to Andrew that it wasn't working. The strain was written all over her face. As he approached her, he noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the way she seemed to recoil when someone made eye contact. It was as though she was living in a constant state of fear, always watching over her shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Lily," Andrew said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear him. "We need to talk." Lily paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the rag she had been using. Then, without a word, she turned toward the back of the diner, her movements stiff and robotic. Andrew followed her, feeling a familiar pang of worry in his chest. The time for subtlety was over. They needed to act. The longer they waited, the more dangerous it would get. Once they were safely in the back room, away from the prying eyes of the other customers, Andrew closed the door behind them. The tension between them was thick, suffocating. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, as if waiting for the other to make the first move. Andrew finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what you said about your father and the debts. I've been in touch with a few people, and I think it's time we move forward. We can't wait any longer." Lily looked down, her fingers fiddling nervously with the edge of her apron. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to make a plan," Andrew said, stepping closer to her. "The man who's been controlling you, the one who's been threatening you, he won't stop. You can't keep living like this. You need to take control back." Lily's eyes darted to the floor. "I don't know if I can. What if it makes things worse? What if they come after you, too?" Andrew's heart ached at the look of fear on her face. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her arm. "We'll figure it out together, but we have to act now. We can't keep running from this." Lily swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she admitted. "I've been running for so long. I've tried to keep my head down, to just survive. I never thought I'd be in this situation." Andrew stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You don't have to do it alone. You have me now. We're in this together, Lily." Her breath hitched as she looked into his eyes, and for a moment the weight of their shared understanding hung between them. There was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it." The decision had been made. They would confront the man who had been controlling her, but the path they were about to walk was fraught with danger. Andrew knew it, and Lily knew it too. They had no idea what awaited them, but they couldn't keep running forever. Something had to change. The first step was gathering information. Andrew called in a few favors and made some discreet inquiries into the man's operations. What he learned wasn't reassuring. The man who had been blackmailing Lily, whom Andrew had come to know only as Marcus, was a dangerous figure, one who had his fingers in several illegal businesses. He wasn't the type of person to let anyone walk away without consequences. The more Andrew dug, the more he realized just how deep the corruption ran. Marcus wasn't just an ordinary criminal, he was a kingpin in a much larger network, one that spanned across several cities. His influence was far-reaching, and he was known for dealing with those who betrayed him in the most brutal of ways. And yet, Andrew couldn't turn away. Lily had trusted him with her secret, and now he was determined to protect her at all costs. The night before their planned meeting with Marcus, Andrew couldn't sleep. He lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. There were too many variables, too many unknowns. He had always prided himself on being prepared, on being in control, but this was different. He couldn't predict what would happen when they faced Marcus. He couldn't protect Lily if things went wrong. The thought of her getting hurt, of her being dragged back into the world she had tried so hard to escape, was too much to bear. He had grown to care for her in a way he hadn't anticipated. She had become more than just an investigation, more than just a puzzle to solve. She had become someone he needed to protect, someone he was willing to risk everything for, but was it enough? The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the city, casting a pale orange light through the windows of Andrew's penthouse. He stood at the window, looking out over the skyline, trying to steady his nerves. Today was the day they would confront Marcus, the day they would take back control of their lives. As he walked out the door, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about Lily, and whatever happened, he couldn't let her face it alone. When Andrew arrived at the diner, Lily was already there, sitting at the counter, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, her face pale, her lips trembling slightly. "We're ready," Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. Lily nodded, but Andrew could see the fear in her eyes. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll be okay," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. Together they walked out of the diner and into the unknown. They met Marcus at a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place was dark and foreboding, the air thick with tension. Andrew's mind raced as they approached the building. They had no backup, no plan B. It was just the two of them standing on the edge of a precipice. As they walked inside, the smell of stale air and old metal filled Andrew's senses. The place was eerily quiet, save for the sound of footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. And then Marcus appeared. He was taller than Andrew had expected, with broad shoulders and a cold, calculating gaze. He was the embodiment of danger, a man who knew exactly how to get what he wanted. "Andrew Montgomery," Marcus said, his voice smooth but with an underlying venom. "And the little waitress. I see you've decided to come for what's mine." Andrew's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "This ends now, Marcus. You've had your hold on her long enough." Marcus chuckled darkly. "You really think you can just waltz in here and take control? You're in over your head, Montgomery. This is bigger than you." Lily stepped forward, her voice trembling, but determined. "I'm done being afraid of you. You don't control me anymore." Marcus's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Then his eyes narrowed. "You've made a big mistake, Lily, and now you'll both pay for it." The revelation, the atmosphere in the warehouse was thick with tension. Every footstep Andrew took echoed through the cavernous space, and the sound of his heart beating in his chest seemed to drown out everything else. He could feel the sweat on his palms as he gripped Lily's hand tighter. They were in this together. Now, no turning back. Marcus stood before them, the smirk on his face slowly fading into something darker. The dim lights overhead cast long shadows, and Andrew's mind raced as he calculated the risks. There was no backup, no safety net, just the three of them in this cold industrial space with their lives hanging in the balance. "You've made a big mistake," Marcus said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You think you can walk in here and take control. You think you can just take what's mine." Lily stood beside Andrew, her shoulders trembling, but her eyes filled with a newfound resolve. She had always been the prey, timid, afraid, looking over her shoulder. But now she was no longer running. She was standing tall, facing her demons, and she wasn't alone. "I'm done being afraid of you," Lily said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "You don't control me anymore." Marcus laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You think you can just walk away from all of this? You have no idea what you're up against." Andrew stepped forward, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. "We're done with this, Marcus. Your hold on her ends today." For a brief moment, Marcus's eyes flickered, something unreadable flashing across his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced with a chilling smile. He was calculating. He was thinking. And Andrew knew deep down that Marcus wasn't one to back down easily. "You really think you can take me down?" Marcus asked, his tone dangerous. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Andrew shot back. "And I'm not leaving here without her." Marcus took a step closer, his body language threatening. "You think you're going to walk out of here alive, Andrew? I can have you both dealt with in an instant. You think she's worth risking your life for? She's nothing but a pawn, a tool. Lily's face went pale at Marcus's words, but Andrew could feel her body stiffen beside him. She was no longer afraid. She wasn't the frightened woman she had been when he first met her. She had changed, and Andrew in turn had changed with her. She wasn't just his responsibility anymore. She was someone worth fighting for. "You're wrong," Andrew said, his voice calm, but with an underlying strength. "She's not just a pawn, she's a person, and I'm not leaving without her. You can try to make threats, but the truth is you're already losing." Marcus's eyes narrowed, the dark glint of danger flashing in his gaze. "You think you've won?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "I've already won. You just don't know it yet." Before Andrew could react, Marcus raised his hand, signaling to the men standing in the shadows. For the first time, Andrew noticed the figures moving at the edges of the room, menacing shapes cloaked in darkness. The air seemed to grow colder, the tension rising. But Andrew wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus," Andrew said, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "You're nothing. You don't control me. You don't control her." Lily's grip on Andrew's hand tightened, and for a moment the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Everything stood on the precipice, as if the next few seconds would decide their fate. And then it happened. The door at the far end of the warehouse slammed open, and 2 police officers stepped inside, guns drawn. The sudden intrusion caught everyone off guard. "What the hell is this?" Marcus growled, his expression darkening as he turned to face the officers. "We have a warrant for your arrest, Marcus," one of the officers said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for extortion, blackmail, and organized crime." Andrew's heart raced. He hadn't expected the police to show up. Not here, not now, but somehow it all felt like fate. All those long hours of investigation, all those secret calls and plans had led to this moment. Marcus's face twisted in fury. "You think you can just walk in here and arrest me?" he snarled, stepping back, his hands raised as if to call his men into action. But it was too late. The officers were already on him. "Don't move!" the other officer shouted, cuffing Marcus's wrists behind his back. "You're done." The men who had been lurking in the shadows stepped forward, but they were quickly subdued by the officers. One by one, they were arrested, their resistance futile against the overwhelming force of the law. For a brief moment, Andrew stood frozen, his mind trying to process everything. It had all happened so quickly. Marcus, the man who had been pulling the strings, was finally being taken down. The power he had held over Lily, over everyone in his path, was crumbling. Lily looked up at Andrew, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Is this really happening?" she whispered. Andrew nodded, his hand still holding hers tightly. "It is. It's over." Later, as the police escorted Marcus and his men out of the warehouse, Andrew and Lily stood together in the dim light, both trying to comprehend the whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. They were free, at least for now. But the truth was they didn't need to be shackled to the past any longer. They had the power to move forward. Lily turned to Andrew, her face softening, the vulnerability still present, but now tempered with a newfound strength. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come. I don't know what I would have done." Andrew smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "You would have found a way," he said, his voice warm. "You're stronger than you know, but I'm glad I was here, and I'm glad you're free." They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other, the weight of everything finally beginning to lift. There was no need for more words. There was only the shared understanding between them. A few weeks later, life began to settle. Marcus and his men were behind bars, and Lily was slowly rebuilding her life. The shadow that had loomed over her for so long was gone, and in its place there was the promise of something brighter, something new. Andrew continued to visit her, though their relationship had changed. It wasn't just about investigation anymore. It was about trust, about understanding, about the quiet connection that had grown between them through everything they had been through. One evening, as they sat together at the counter of the diner, Lily finally spoke what was on both of their minds. "What happens now?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his. Andrew smiled, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "Now we move forward," he said, "together." And for the first time in a long while, Lily smiled. Truly smiled. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like something she could face. The end.